I had dressed the Duke of Renwick for 11 years, and in 11 years I had never once seen him falter. Not at a wedding, not at a funeral, not across the whist table when a fortune lay on the last card. So when I tell you that a small, plain woman in a made-over gray gown undid him in a single sentence, you will understand that I do not say it lightly. But that comes later. Let me begin where the snow began, on the North Road out of London, with his Grace lounging in the corner of the carriage as though the cold had been arranged for his comfort. "You are frowning, Reeve," he said, without opening his eyes. "You frown when you disapprove, and you disapprove of me constantly. It is one of your finer qualities." "I was thinking of the roads, Your Grace." "The sky has that look." "The sky is always about to do something dreadful in your account of it." He smiled, that easy, unhurried smile that had emptied half the drawing-rooms in England of their good sense. "We shall arrive, we shall be charming, and by 12th night I shall be very nearly engaged to Miss Aurelia Frost and her £40,000, and my mother will weep with relief. There, I have told your fortune and mine both. Rest your mind." I did not rest my mind. I had been with him since he was a boy of 10, sent up to me at Renwick Court with a cricket bat and a stammer and eyes too large for his face, and I knew things about the man dozing across from me that his mother did not know, that the whole glittering world of London did not know. I knew that the charm was learned. I had watched him learn it, the way another boy learns Latin, by repetition, by fear of the rod, by discovering that the true Sebastian, the earnest one who loved the estate dogs and could not look a stranger in the eye, was of no interest to anyone at all, and the invented Sebastian, the one with the ready word and the warm laugh, was welcome everywhere. He had chosen the invented one. He had chosen him so completely that I was no longer sure some days whether he remembered there had been a choice. The first snow came down as we crested the moor above Winterset, in flakes the size of shillings, and by the time the horses turned in at the gates of Bramber Court, the world had gone white and soundless, and the coachman was swearing under his breath about the drifts already gathering in the lane. "You see," I said. "I see a house with a great many candles lit," said his Grace, "and I intend to be pleasant inside it. Come, Reeve, sulk indoors where it is warm." Bramber Court belonged to Sir Marcus Hartley, a florid, kindly, unremarkable man who had made a great deal of money in ways nobody discussed, and to his wife, Lady Hartley, who wished more than anything in the world to be thought fashionable and knew, painfully, that she was not. The house party had been assembled to that end. A duke, an heiress, a scattering of the better county families, and the snow, when it shut the doors upon us all 4 days before Christmas and did not let up, turned Lady Hartley's careful little gathering into something none of us had bargained for. There is no truer test of a man's manners than to be locked in a house with the same 20 people while the drifts climb the windows. Charm is cheap for an evening. It is very dear indeed for a fortnight. His Grace was, of course, magnificent from the first hour. I watched him from the doorway as he crossed Lady Hartley's drawing-room, and I watched the room turn toward him the way a field of flowers turns toward the sun. He kissed the hostess's hand and told her the house was the warmest and most welcoming he had entered in a 12-month. And Lady Hartley, who had been dreading precisely this man's judgment above all others, went pink to the ears and believed every word. He found Miss Aurelia Frost within the quarter hour, and I will say for Miss Frost that she was as lovely as her £40,000, golden, poised, quick to laugh at the right moment, and she received his gallantries the way a practiced hostess receives a familiar gift, with pleasure and no surprise at all. They were very well matched. They both knew exactly how the dance was to be danced. And then in the far corner, near the tall cold window where the good light was, I saw the woman nobody had introduced. She was not lovely, not in the way the room understood the word. She was small and neat and somewhere past the first bloom of youth, 26, I learned afterward, with brown hair drawn back plainly and a gray gown that had been a better color once and turned twice since. She sat a little apart with a work-basket, mending a flounce that belonged to somebody else, and she watched the room the way I watched it, from the edge, seeing everything, expecting nothing. When His Grace laughed his warm laugh and the room laughed with him, she did not laugh. She threaded her needle. "Who is the woman by the window?" His Grace asked me later in the dressing room while I drew off his boots. "Miss Brearley, your Grace, Lady Hartley's cousin." "A poor relation, I understand. She keeps the accounts and reads to the old aunt and makes herself useful." "She looked at me," he said, "as though I were a conjurer she had already seen perform." "Did she, your Grace?" "Twice." He was frowning now himself, which was rare enough that I looked up. Everyone in that room I could read like a bill of fare. I knew what each of them wanted and I gave it to them and they were happy. She wanted nothing from me at all. I found it, he searched, which he never did, restful and a little insulting. "Put out the gray coat tomorrow, Reeve, the one that makes me look serious." I put out the gray coat. It did no good whatsoever, as you shall see, but I put it out. He found her the next morning in the library, which was the coldest room in the house and therefore empty of everyone but her. I know because I had gone in to lay a fire. The housemaids were run off their feet with the extra guests, and I was on my knees at the grate when His Grace came in, and Miss Brearley was already there at the long table, copying something into a ledger with an ink-stained finger, and neither of them saw me behind the great leather chair. So I heard it all, and I set it down here honestly, for it is the truth of how it began. "Miss Brearley," said His Grace, in the voice that had never in living memory failed of its effect, "I have been hoping to be introduced to you since the moment I arrived, and the snow, cruel as it is, has at least been kind enough to prevent your escape. You must forgive my boldness. A man cannot always wait upon ceremony when the thing he wants is a conversation with the only interesting person in the house." It was beautifully done. I have heard him say 100 such things, and I have watched 100 women receive them like sunlight. Miss Brearley set down her pen. She looked at him, not unkindly but very steadily, the way a schoolmistress looks at a clever boy who has said his lesson well and understood none of it. "Your Grace," she said, "please don't." There was a silence in the cold library that I felt in my own chest. "I beg your pardon," said His Grace. "You called me the only interesting person in the house. You have been here since yesterday evening and we have not exchanged a word, so you cannot know whether I am interesting. You only know that I did not admire you across the drawing-room, and that has made you curious, which is a different thing entirely." She said it without heat, arranging her ledgers as she spoke, as though correcting a small sum. "Save your pretty words, your Grace. Spend them where they'll be wanted. I'd rather have plain speech and my ledger than the finest compliment in England, because I know exactly what a compliment is worth, and it isn't much. I have served great men. I have never in my life seen one so entirely at a loss." His Grace opened his mouth and closed it, and for the first time in 11 years I watched him reach for the word that was always there, the light, deflecting, charming word, and find nothing in his hand. "You think me insincere," he managed. "I think you a very kind man who has decided that kindness only counts if it is decorated," she said, and she picked up her pen again. "And I think the decoration has become so much a habit that you no longer notice you are hanging it on the walls. Good morning, your Grace. There is a fire being laid behind you, so do sit. The room will be warmer directly." And she went back to her sums. His Grace stood a moment longer. Then he turned and saw me at the grate, and something crossed his face that I had not seen since he was a boy, a kind of exposure, the look of a man caught without his coat. He recovered it at once. He always recovered. "Reeve," he said, "a word outside." In the corridor he was silent for the length of 3 portraits. Then he said, in quite a different voice, low and almost wondering, "She refused me, Reeve." "So I heard, your Grace." "No woman has ever refused me." He said it not with vanity but with something nearer alarm, as a man might say the ground has never before moved beneath my feet. "I do not mean my hand. I mean she refused the whole of it, the performance. She would not take the coin. Do you understand?" She looked straight through the man everyone else applauds and found him wanting, and she was. He stopped. She was not wrong. No, your grace, I said, she was not. He looked at me sharply, but I only smoothed his cuff, and after a moment he laughed, though it was not his easy laugh. It had a crack in it. Very well, he said, I shall win her over. Your grace. Not for sport, Reeve. Well, honesty tugged at him. Another thing that woman had done in a single morning. A little for sport, but chiefly because I have met the one person in England who cannot be flattered, and I find I would give a great deal to be liked by her when I have nothing to offer but liking. I have never had to do it before. I have never once in my whole life had to be liked without the applesauce. He used the schoolroom word deliberately, mocking himself, and I understood that he was frightened, and that he did not yet know it was fear. The snow fell for 11 days. I shall not give you all 11, for a great deal of it was ordinary. The party at cards, at charades, at the long dinners that Lady Hartley stretched thinner each night as the larder shrank. But I shall give you the days that mattered, for they were the days his grace laid down his weapons one by one, without meaning to, until he stood before that plain woman with nothing at all. The first days he tried to charm her still, because it was all he knew, and she parried every stroke so easily that it became almost comic. He praised her needlework. She told him it was Lady Hartley's flounce and she'd have preferred to be reading. He offered to fetch her a book. She said she had 2 feet and a knowledge of where the library was, both of which he lacked information about, having so many people to fetch things for him. He complimented her eyes, her one indisputable beauty, dark and steady and quick, and she said, Your Grace, my eyes have been the same color these 26 years, and no gentleman remarked them while I had a dowry, and my mother was alive to sit beside me. You'll forgive me if I don't set much store by the discovery now. That last one I saw land. It went in under his guard because it was true and because it told him something, that this woman had once had a place in the world and lost it and had made her peace with the losing and wanted no man's pity dressed up as admiration. He did not answer with a compliment. He was learning. How did you lose the dowry? He asked her instead, plainly, the way she liked, and I saw her look at him with the first flicker of surprise. My father speculated, she said after a moment, and died before he could recover it, which he swore he would and which I dare say he believed. He was a charming man, my father. Everyone said so. She let that sit between them. Charming men are very expensive, Your Grace. They cost the people who love them a great deal, and they never quite understand why, because the charm has always cost them nothing at all. He went white at that. I was pouring the tea and I nearly overset it. She had reached into him and found the exact place where he was hollow and pressed it, not to wound. She had no notion, I think, how near she had come, but simply because she said what was true. And his Grace, who could have turned it off with a laugh, did not laugh. He set down his cup and said, very quietly, That is the truest and least comfortable thing anyone has said to me in 20 years. Then I'm sorry for the 20 years, said Miss Brearley, if that was the best you were offered. The turn came on the 6th day, and it came because of the snow itself, which does not care in the least for charm. Word reached the house at midday that old Corney the shepherd, who lived alone in a cottage above the top field, had not been seen since the drifts closed the lane, and that his smoke had not risen that morning nor the morning before. Sir Marcus fretted and said the man was likely snug enough, and that no one could get up the top field in this, and the gentlemen agreed it was a great pity and a hard winter, and returned to the fire. And Miss Brearley rose and set down her work-basket, and said she was going up. You cannot be serious, said Lady Hartley. He read to me when I first came here and knew no one, said Miss Brearley, already at the door. And he is 80 years old and alone in the cold, and I will not sit at a good fire drinking chocolate while he freezes for want of anyone troubling to walk half a mile. I have walked it before. I know the wall to follow when the path is gone. There was a great deal of protesting and no one moving in the way of drawing rooms, and I confess I was reaching for my own coat, thinking a valet might at least go where the gentleman would not, when his grace stood up. He did not make a speech about it. That is the thing I remember. The Duke of Renwick, who could not enter a room without a flourish, said only, "I'll come," and went out to the hall for his boots, and by the time I had followed him he was already asking me, for the second muffler and the flask and the length of rope Sir Marcus's man had, and there was not 1 ounce of performance anywhere about him. He was frightened for the old man he had never met, and he was going, and he wanted the rope. I gave him the rope. I have never been prouder to hand him anything. I went with them as far as the top wall. An old servant is stubborner than snow, and I will tell you what I saw, because it is the whole of the man, the real one, the one I had dressed for 11 years and half despaired of ever meeting again. The drifts on the top field were to the waist and worse in the hollows, and the wind took the breath out of you, and the world was one blind white roar. Miss Brearley went first, because she knew the wall, one gloved hand on the frozen stones, and his grace went behind her with the rope about them both. And twice she went down into a soft place over her head, and twice he had her up before I had finished being afraid, hauling her out by main strength with the snow caked white on his fine gray coat, and his hat gone God knew where and his hair full of ice, and he was laughing, not the drawing-room laugh, a real one, ragged and delighted, the laugh of a boy. And calling to her through the wind, "Left. Follow the wall left, you obstinate woman, or I shall have died of admiration in a snowdrift, and my mother will be very cross." And she was laughing back, and I understood that I was watching 2 people fall in love in the worst weather in England while attempting to rescue an 80-year-old shepherd, and that neither of them had the faintest idea. They found old Corney alive, cold to the bone, his fire dead, too weak to have gone for help, but alive. And it was his grace who got him wrapped and got the brandy into him and got the fire going with his own hands, hands that I would have sworn did not know one end of a tinderbox from the other, while Miss Brearley chafed the old man's feet and scolded him fondly for a stubborn fool, which was, I noticed, precisely what she had been called an hour before. And when the shepherd was warm and safe and sleeping, and there was nothing to do but wait out the worst of the wind before starting down, the 2 of them sat on either side of that cottage fire, soaked and steaming and spent, and looked at each other across the flames, and did not say anything charming at all. "You didn't have to come," she said at last. "No," he said. "Why did you?" And here it was, the moment where the old Sebastian would have said something lovely and untrue. I watched him find it and set it down. "Because you were going whether anyone came or not," he said, "and I could not bear to be the sort of man who let you." He looked into the fire. "I have spent my whole life," he said slowly, as if the words were being pulled up from a well he had capped long ago, "being the man a room wants me to be. I am very good at it. It is the only thing I am good at, and I learned it because the man I actually was, a stammering, earnest, tiresome boy who loved dogs and hated parties. That man was wanted by no one, not even, I think, my father. So I killed him and put on a better one. And I have worn the better one so long, Miss Brearley, that until 3 days ago I would have told you the earnest boy was dead and no loss. But he is not dead. He is the one who came up the top field with a rope, and you are the first person since I was 10 years old who preferred him." The fire snapped. The old shepherd slept. Outside the wind was dropping at last. "He is worth 10 of the other one," said Miss Brearley quietly. "The charming Duke. I'd not cross a warm room to speak to him. This one I'd cross a snowfield for." I did. They came down at dusk with the shepherd on a hurdle between them, and Bramber Court made a great fuss, and his grace let Sir Marcus clap him on the back and Lady Hartley exclaim over his ruined coat, and he said all the right modest things. But he said them, I saw from a distance now, as one plays a part one has outgrown, and his eyes kept finding the gray gown across the crowded hall, and hers kept finding him, and something had changed in the house that all the candles could not have lit. I thought, God forgive me, that it was as good as done. I had reckoned without the dowager. The roads to Winterset were still shut, but the mails found a way through on the 9th day, half frozen, and among the letters was one in a hand I knew too well. The Dowager Duchess of Rennick, His Grace's mother, writing from Bath, where she was taking the waters and directing her son's life from 3 counties off. I did not read it, of course, but I dressed him for dinner within the hour of his reading it, and I did not need to. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. The old armor was back on, buckled tight. "My mother sends her love," he said too lightly, "and reminds me that Miss Frost's settlement is all but drawn, and that Rennick has 3 mortgaged farms that £40,000 would set free, and that a duke does not marry to please himself but to preserve what his tenants depend upon, and that she has told all Bath the match is made." He looked at his reflection in the glass, at the charming duke I had built around him with brush and cloth. "She is not wrong, Reeve. That is the devil of it. She is never wrong. There are 3 families on those farms." "There are, your grace. A man in my position cannot marry a penniless companion because she pulled him out of a snowdrift and told him the truth by a fire." He said it as though testing whether he could bear the weight of it. It would be the most sentimental folly in England." "Yes, your grace," I said, "because I have learned that when a man is arguing with himself, the worst thing a servant can do is take his side. He will only argue the harder to spite you." He went down to dinner and he was brilliant. That is the only word. He was the most charming man in England again, and he turned the whole of it upon Miss Aurelia Frost, who received it, as ever, with golden ease. And I stood at the sideboard and watched Miss Brearley in her corner see it happen. She was not a fool. She had never been a fool. She watched him lavish upon the heiress every warm word he had begun, that week, to unlearn, and she understood exactly what it meant. That the snowfield and the fire and the earnest boy had been, after all, a thing that happened in the snow, and that the world had reasserted its claims, and that she had let herself be charmed by a man's momentary honesty as her mother had let herself be charmed, and her father had charmed and been charmed to the family's ruin. I watched her put down her fork very quietly and fold her hands and go somewhere behind her own eyes where no one could reach her, and I could have wept. She caught him afterward in the passage, and I heard it, for I was clearing the plate he'd left. She did not weep or accuse. That was not her way. "You needn't trouble to explain, your grace," she said. "I understood perfectly at dinner. You are quite right, of course. A duke has obligations, and I have my ledgers, and it was foolish of us both to forget it up a snowy hill. I only ask one thing." Her voice did not shake. It was the steadiest thing in the house. "Don't be charming to me again. Not once. I could bear it from a stranger. I found I could not bear the applesauce from you, having once seen there was a man underneath it. So spend it on Miss Frost, who likes it, and leave me my plain speech in my corner, and we shall both go on very well." And she went up to bed, and his grace stood in the passage a long time, and when he came up to be undressed his face was the face of a man who has done a sum 3 times and got an answer he cannot live with. "I have made her think," he said, "that I was only ever performing with her, when it was the one time in my life I was not." "Then tell her so, your grace." "With what?" he rounded on me, and it was not anger, it was despair. "Words, Reeve. I have nothing but words, and words are exactly what she will not believe from me, and she is right not to, for I have spent 30 years teaching the world that my words are counterfeit. How does a man who has lied charmingly all his life prove that, for once, he means it? What is left to him? She has stripped me of the only tool I own, and I am standing here with empty hands." I finished with his cravat. I am not a clever man, and I did not have the answer for him then. But I lay awake that night in the cold little room over the stables, and toward morning I thought I had it, and being an old servant who had grown too fond of the boy to hold his tongue, I gave it to him plainly, as she would have. "Your grace," I said, laying out the razor, "you asked me last night what a man has left when his fine words won't be believed. I have thought on it. It seems to me the answer is, he has the plain ones, the ones he's never used because they weren't grand enough." You have never in your life said a clumsy, honest thing to a woman because you've always had a better turned one to hand. So say the clumsy one. Say the thing so plain and so poor that no charming man would ever stoop to it, and she'll know because it cost you your one accomplishment to say it that you couldn't be performing. A man performs to look better than he is, Your Grace. Look worse. Look like the stammering boy. That's the only thing she'll believe because it's the one thing you could never fake. He looked at me in the glass for a long moment. And the farms, Reeve, the mortgages, my mother, all Bath. I've dressed dukes 40 years, Your Grace, I said, and I've buried the ones who married for the farms and pleased their mothers and were never once loved for themselves. I laid out their good coats and I stood at the back of the church at their grand cold weddings and I watched them get exactly what they'd bargained for, which was everything except the one thing. You can save 3 farms. Nobody living can save a man from a whole life of being applauded by people who never knew him, except, it seems, one plain woman in a gray gown who has already gone up half a hill for you. I stropped the razor. There are other heiresses, Your Grace. There are other mortgages. There will not be another Miss Brearley. I have watched you your whole life, and I am telling you as I would tell my own son if I had one. This is the hinge of it. Everything after turns on what you do this morning. Now, shall I shave you, or shall you go and do it unshaven and desperate, which I think would serve you better? He laughed, the real one, cracked and frightened and alive, and he stood up, and he did not let me shave him, and he did not let me put on the gray coat that made him look serious or the blue that made him look devastating. He went down in his shirt sleeves with his hair every way, looking for the first time in 11 years, like nothing at all, like a man and not a duke, and I followed him because I would not have missed it for the estate itself. The thaw had come in the night. You could hear it, the drip and rush of it, the snow sliding off the eaves in soft thunder, and the guests were all at the windows exclaiming that the roads would be open by afternoon and they might all go home. And in the midst of them, Miss Aurelia Frost stood golden and expectant, having been told by her mother, who had been told by the dowager, exactly how this Christmas was meant to end. His Grace crossed the room to her first. I held my breath. Miss Frost, he said, and there was no charm in it at all, only a plain, grave courtesy that made her look up in surprise. You are the most accomplished young woman I have met this 12-month, and you deserve a husband who will love you, and I am not able to be that man, and it would be the shabbiest thing I ever did to marry you knowing it. My mother has arranged a great deal on my behalf, and I am sorry for the embarrassment of unarranging it, but I'll not make you a bargain of my heart when it isn't mine to trade. Forgive me. The room went utterly silent. Miss Frost, who was not, I think, in love with him either, but only with the excellent sense of the thing, colored, and then, for she had more character than her 40,000 pounds had ever required her to show, inclined her head and said, "Then I'm glad to know it now, Your Grace, and not at the altar," and she meant it, and I liked her better in that moment than in all the days before. And then His Grace turned in his shirt sleeves, with the whole snowbound party staring, and he crossed the room to the cold window where Miss Constance Brearley sat with her ledger, having watched all of it, her face very still and very pale. He did not go down on one knee. He did not make a speech. He stood before her, and I watched him reach from habit for something lovely to say, and I watched him let it go, deliberately, the way a drowning man lets go of the thing that will not float him. And what he said at last was so plain and so poor that a titter went round the fashionable part of the room, and I have treasured it above every eloquent thing I ever heard him say. "I'm no good at this," he said. "I'm only good at the other thing, the pretty words, and you won't have those, and you're right not to, and now I find I've nothing left to offer you but the truth, which is that I'm a frightened man of 35 who has been pretending to be somebody better since he was a boy, and the only hours of my whole life I've felt like a real person were the hours on that hill, and by that fire with you. That's all. That's the whole of it. I've no charm left for you. I've spent it all trying not to say this, so I can only say it badly. I don't want the heiress or the farms or all Bath. I want to be the man you pulled out of a snowdrift for the rest of my life if you'll have him. He's not much. But he's real, and he's yours, and he doesn't know how to say it any better than that. And do you know, he was shaking. The Duke of Rennick, in front of 20 people, was shaking like the stammering boy of 10, with no coat on and his hair every way, having thrown away his mother's plans and his charming reputation and his one accomplishment, and standing there with empty hands and the plainest sentence in England, because it was the only thing she could not disbelieve. Miss Brearley looked at him. She looked at him for so long that I thought my old heart would stop. And then I saw it. Her steady dark eyes filled, though not one tear fell, for she was not a woman who wept easily, and she stood up from her chair, and she took both his shaking hands in her ink-stained ones, and she said, in her plain, clear, unornamented voice that carried to every corner of that silent room, "I believe you," she said. "That's the thing you never understood all those years, spending your beautiful words on rooms full of people who applauded and forgot. It was never the fine speech that wanted believing. It was you. And I've believed in you since you handed a stranger's shepherd your own coat and got his fire going with your own hands and never told a soul it was worth telling. You didn't say it well, Sebastian. You've said it true. And true I will have, and true I will keep all the days of my life. There is not much more to tell, and what there is happiness, which makes a poor tale but a good life." They were married in the little church at Winterset before the snow was fairly gone from the hedges, with old Corney, the shepherd, well enough to sit in a front pew and weep into a red handkerchief, and Sir Marcus giving her away, and Lady Hartley, who had wanted so badly to be thought fashionable, discovering to her astonishment that she was now the cousin of a duchess, and cared for it far less than she had expected to. The dowager came round in time, as mothers do, chiefly when she found that her plain, penniless daughter-in-law kept the Rennick accounts with such a shrewd and steady hand, that within 3 years the 3 mortgaged farms were free and clear without any heiress at all. For it turned out that a woman who had kept a poor cousin's ledgers through 6 lean years knew rather more about saving an estate than £40,000 spent on settling one ever had. My mistress was very good at sums. I have said so. And his Grace, he is charming still when charm is called for. It is a useful thing, and there is no sense in wasting it. But I have watched him these years, and I can tell you that the man who comes down to breakfast is the earnest one now, the one who loves the dogs and would rather walk the fields than dance at a ball, and that the other one, the invented one, the one I built with brush and cloth, has been quietly and gratefully set aside. He did not need him any more. He had been seen, once plainly, by a woman who wanted nothing decorated, and being seen, it seems, is the one thing charm was always meant to be a substitute for, and never could be. I dressed him for his wedding morning, and for once he let me put on the finest coat in his press, and he stood before the glass a moment looking at the Duke of Rennick, and then he turned away from it toward the door and toward her, and he said to me, quite low, "You told me, Reeve, that there would not be another Miss Brearley." "I did, Your Grace." "You were the only man in England who knew it, and the only one who told me." He put his hand on my old shoulder, which he had never done in 11 years. "The earnest boy thanks you," he said. "He remembers who kept him alive all those years when nobody wanted him. He hasn't forgotten. He never will. I am an old man now, and I have dressed my last Duke, and I have seen a great deal of the world and most of its follies, and if you were to ask me, an ordinary servant who watched it all from the edge of the rooms, the way she did, what I have learned of love in a long life, I would tell you only this, which she taught the both of us that winter in the snow. That the whole of it, the whole of what any heart is truly asking, under all the pretty words and all the fine settlements and all the applause, is only to be known just as we are, without decoration, and wanted anyway. He spent 30 years being adored by people who never knew him, and it left him hollow as a bell. She spent one morning knowing him, plain and cold and frightened and true, and it filled him for a lifetime. Save your pretty words, She told him on the first day in the cold library. He did, and in the end, having none left, he gave her the truest thing he had, which was himself. And she, who had refused the Duke that half of London loved, took the man that no one else had ever troubled to see, and loved him all her days. I have never dressed a happier one.